I'm late. I had to stop by the Wax Museum again and give the finger to FDR.
We know Al-Qaeda, Zawahiri, is supporting the opposition in Syria. Are we supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria?
It's a proud day for America. And by God, we've kicked Vietnam syndrome once and for all. Thank you very, very much.
I say it again, you've been had. You've been took. You've been hoodwinked.
These witnesses are trying to simply deny things that just about everybody else accepts as fact.
He came, he saw, he died.
Well, we ain't killing their army, but we killing them. We be on CNN like, say our name, bitch, say it 3 times.
The meeting of the largest armies in the history of the world. Then there's going to be an invasion.
All right, y'all, introducing Jacob Hornberger. He's the founder and the president of the Future of Freedom Foundation at FFF.org. And they've been around since the very late 1980s and got literally a ton of online articles for free for you there. And, you know, atoms, ones and zeros are extremely lightweight. So a literal ton of online articles is a lot of online articles. I mean it. Welcome back to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be with you, Scott. Thank you for having me on again.
Well, that's nice of you to say. Hey, listen, I like your article so much so that I reprinted it at the Libertarian Institute. It's called Legalize Drugs, All Drugs. And so, yeah, well, I agree with that. Nice to have you on to talk about it again. And you start off here with Milton Friedman, attacking the right from the right in a way here. Explain.
Well, Friedman was one of the early libertarians that was taking a leading role in ending the war on drugs. And back, I think it was in 1972, he wrote an open letter to Bill Bennett, who was the so-called drug czar at that time. He wrote it in the Wall Street Journal that just threw down the gauntlet on Bennett. He just said, look, you know, regardless of any good intentions you may have here to bring a drug-free society to America or the rest of the world, the means you have chosen through drug laws and draconian penalties and so forth is the wrong means. That you're never going to achieve what you want to achieve with this means of making drugs illegal. And he talked about prohibition as an example, where the same objectives stamp out alcohol use in America, and yet it didn't do that, but you end up with a society filled with violence and ruination of lives and destructiveness until Americans finally came to their senses and realized, you know, this is not something that should be criminalized. It should be left entirely to the private sector. And Friedman's saying the exact same thing should happen with drugs, that you're repeating the prohibition, you know, it's the same old story. And sure enough, I mean, you know, nobody obviously paid attention to Friedman. Libertarians did. I mean, we have been leading this movement toward drug legalization since at least the 70s. But, you know, society at large said, oh, that's outrageous, that's ridiculous. And so here we are, you know, many decades after Friedman wrote that open letter, and everything he said has turned out to be true. Massive violence, destructiveness, death, ruination of lives, mass incarceration, illegal searches and seizures, humiliation of blacks, abuse of blacks, and all for nothing because you still got the same drug flows into the United States. And so obviously that's water under the bridge, but going forward is not water under the bridge. Going forward, we should be doing what Friedman said back in 1972, and that is just ending the war on drugs, legalizing all drugs, not just marijuana, as some people advocate, legalizing heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines, opioids, everything, and leaving drug addiction in the private sector and rehab centers, therapy, and so forth is where it belongs.
All right. Well, so before we go back, because you went through a quick list there, and I want to talk about the economic incentives of prohibition. But what about the economic incentives of legalization? Why, you would just have heroin and vending machines on the public sidewalks?
Well, in a sense, yes, but that's ordinarily not what's going to happen.
Oh, man, I was pitching you a softball. You totally missed it. You're supposed to say libertarians are against public sidewalks.
Oh, gosh, that was a good one. You got me good on that one.
Yeah, well, sorry. Okay, go ahead. No, but that's the fear, right? Is, look, you want government, which is basically the stand-in for Jesus, the arbiter of morality on the planet, to say that drugs are okay now. So then now a bunch of really bad things are going to happen, like people are going to use drugs more and stuff.
Well, that's the argument, and it's certainly possible that when drugs are legal that more people will use them. They'll say, oh, well, gosh, now it's legal. I think I'll go try it. But, how many people do you really know that are just anxiously awaiting to go snort some cocaine and just waiting for the law to be changed? I don't know of any. And you also have to think about the forbidden fruit factor. How many people are tempted to ingest illicit drugs, especially young people, because it's prohibited? And so there's that factor. But ultimately, it's like, what business does the state have in punishing a person for engaging in a purely peaceful, albeit maybe destructive activity? I mean, this is the very essence of freedom. If you're not free to put whatever you want into your own mouth, there is no way that you can be said to be living in a free society. It's just none of the government's business. Now, does that mean that libertarians condone the use of drugs? Of course not. It doesn't mean that at all. I mean, a good analogy of this is like adultery. Libertarians don't believe that adultery should be criminalized. People shouldn't be going to jail for engaging in an extramarital affair. That doesn't mean necessarily that we're sitting there, hey, saying adultery is a great thing. It's just saying that in the world of peaceful activity, people sometimes choose in ways that other people disapprove of, and that might even objectively be considered wrong. Those don't belong in the criminal justice system. The only activities that should be involved in the criminal justice system are activities that involve violence against other people, like murder, rape, theft, or fraud against other people, which is essentially a way to steal from people, robbery, burglary. That when you trespass on other people's rights, that belongs in the criminal justice system. But when you engage in peaceful activities, including sinful activity, immoral activity, those do not belong in the realm of the Caesar's jurisdiction. They belong in the realm of the private sector.
Well, and then now to go back to the perverse incentives of prohibition, you see things like, we talk about violent crime. The worst kind of violent crimes are committed by crack addicts and meth addicts, both of whom are, probably would just sniff cocaine up their nose if it was legal and affordable. And instead, prohibition has, had that, I don't know, I know it has an academic name for it, right? The potency increase effect or whatever they want to call it, where, people switch from cocaine to meth just because of the availability and the price and the bang for your buck and that kind of thing. And those are the tweakers, those are the people you really want to stay away from, where a cokehead probably is not going to be as bad of a problem on average.
Yeah, well, it's just impossible to say. I mean, there is obviously a drug problem in America. I mean, there are masses of people that are ingesting alcohol. That's a drug. Tobacco, that's a drug. In fact, alcohol and tobacco kill many more people than the illegal drugs do. People smoke marijuana, they snort cocaine, some people inject heroin. There's obviously an opioid crisis going on. The real question is, does any of this belong in the criminal justice system? Or to put it another way, should people be sent to jail for doing these things? And that's what's just so shocking, that we live in a society where the state is punishing people, putting them in jail for these kind of things. I mean, when you look at it just, from on high and you look down on it, it really is a shocking thing. I mean, drug addiction is difficult enough for some people. They're obviously going through, or some of them are going through difficult parts of their lives. I mean, why else would you take a substance that is mind altering, that makes you feel better and so forth? It's usually because you're going through a tough time or some other reason. But what business does the state have in sending you to jail for that? It's absolutely shocking to me.
Yeah, well, and I actually had a conversation with a friend who has chronic pain problems, and talking about all the hoops that she and her doctor have to jump through in order to stay off the DEA's radar. So if she actually has an okay month and takes a few less pain pills, well, that looks really bad because now you have this surplus of pain pills. And what do you need them for then? And then from the point of view of the DEA, is the doctor in on her plot to have this extra margin of pills that she can now sell on the black market, when actually what happened was she had a couple of pain-free days that month? Thank goodness. And that usually doesn't happen. She wants to take as few of these pills as she possibly can, and so she skipped a couple of doses. Isn't that nice? But instead, it's the kind of thing where her doctor's going, no, you can't do that. Because he's terrified, right? His business could be shut down. He could go to prison. She could go to prison. Who knows what they could try to make out of it if they decided to try to make a case out of just a completely non-criminal situation between a patient and her doctor that has, no abuse or no, criminal connotations in any sense to it, other than the degree of the regulations sitting on top of them.
That's a great point. I mean, you can't really blame doctors for being ultra cautious about this thing. I mean, they really are subject to being prosecuted and sent to jail. And I've been reading articles where opioid addicts, that people really need the stuff for their pain. I mean, the pain is really bad. And one guy was having to travel like 300 miles. I think he was in Texas, to find one doctor who was willing to prescribe the necessary amount of painkillers that this guy needed. And that physician told him, look, I think I'm going out of business soon. And so the opioid addict was considering suicide. And the article sort of revolving around that theme of how many drug users, specifically the opioid users, are committing suicide because they can't stand the pain anymore. And ultimately, this is a matter between the doctor and his patient.
Right.
But
all right, now, so I think it's important. You start out the thing with Milton Friedman in 1972, and this is just at the start of Nixon's drug war. And there had been prohibition. Really, it was a jobs program left over from alcohol prohibition. Well, we'll just have you focus on narcotics and pot and stuff like that in the New Deal days, so these cops wouldn't have to get jabs. And so, here they still are holding their jobs. And but so Milton Friedman comes in and he applies just a free market economic analysis to what's at that point just the beginning of this new era of crusade against drug abuse and the trade in drugs, and he predicted exactly what has happened, exactly what has played out. I mean, that's pretty good, right? 72. It's and you have this extended block quote of him here explaining not just what's going to happen, but why. Right? He's not saying I'm making predictions. He's saying here's how economics works, and here's what's going to happen. And you talk quite a bit about this and explain real well in your article too about. Okay, so what happens when you have an open market in a product and you make it illegal, or, and also, I guess, when you clamp down on it, when you increase the penalties and increase the enforcement, like at the dawn of Nixon's drug war, what does it really change? And so talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I actually misstated it. In 72, Friedman actually published an article in Newsweek called Prohibition in Drugs, where he talked about these things. And then almost 20 years later, of course, the issue's still there, and he gets into this exchange with Bill Bennett, and that was the Wall Street Journal article. So, I mean, this thing goes back decades. And where are we today? I mean, obviously, the war on drugs has not been won. In fact, it's the exact opposite. They tell us it has to be waged more fiercely than ever, which is a pretty strong indication that their decades-long drug war has failed. And it will always fail. It's just a matter of laws of supply and demand. They say they want to get rid of the drug pushers, the drug cartels, the drug dealers, and they're talking about these violent criminals and the drug gangs and so forth. But it's actually their drug prohibition, and this is what Friedman said, that brings these kind of people into existence. That in a legalized market, which existed in the United States all through the 1800s, early 1900s, the pharmacies are selling the drugs. Well, pharmacies worry about their reputation. They also worry about their pocketbooks. So they're gonna provide good clean drugs, good clean needles. They don't want to get sued by somebody for negligently giving them a dirty needle. And so people come in and buy drugs. They're adults. They do so. And then the pharmacist is going to also be concerned about selling to kids. He's got a reputation to uphold. If people find out that he's out there pushing drugs on kids, that's going to hurt his bottom line because people are likely to boycott them. But in the process, you put out of business all the people that they're trying to put out of business through the criminal justice system. That all these drug gangs and drug cartels, they cannot survive in a legal market. They can only survive in a black market where violence pays off, where you get rid of your competition by killing them off. You don't see pharmacies killing each other off because they're competing against each other. So by legalizing drugs, you've got pharmacies and other companies that are providing drugs to people that they can count on. They can count on that they're not corrupted. They're not going to cause them death because they've been polluted with some other item. And you get rid of all the violence that comes with the drug war, the drug gangs, the drug cartels. Now, here's another factor to consider, that the more they crack down, the more that restricts supply. Well, what does that mean? Well, restricted supply means the price goes up. Well, as the price goes up, that lures more people into it. This is why you have ordinary people like flight attendants in airplanes that are smuggling drugs in when they would never do that. Why? Because the amount of money that can be made in just one score is so huge that it's worth it for them in their minds to take the risk. So the more they crack down, the worse the problem gets, because the more the price goes up and the more ordinary people get into the drug trade. There's no way, Scott, that they can ever win a war like this. They couldn't win it with alcohol. They cannot win it with tobacco. And they certainly are not going to be able to win it with the rest of these illicit drugs.
The Scott Horton Show is brought to you by books, particularly Kesslin Runs, a new dystopian novel about the very near future by the great Charles Featherstone. Kesslin Runs. Also, No Dev, No Ops, No IT by Hussein Badakhshani, and The War State by Mike Swanson, about the rise of the military-industrial complex in America after World War II. He also gives great investment advice at wallstreetwindow.com. And when you follow his advice, you'll want to get some precious metals, gold and silver and etc. from Roberts & Roberts Brokerage Inc. That's at rrbi.co. rrbi.co. Also, check out Zencash at zencash.com or zensystem.io. It's a great digital currency, but it's also a messaging app and a document transfer app and all kinds of great stuff, too. Learn all about it at zencash.com. And then there's Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom. If you sign up from the link on my page at scotthorton.org, I'll get a little bit of a kickback there. And check this out. Speaking of scotthorton.org, if you'd like expanddesigns.com to build you a new 2018 model website, go to expanddesigns.com/Scott and you'll save $500. Also, don't forget thebumpersticker.com. Stickers for your band or your business at very reasonable prices. High quality stuff there. It used to be my company back when. Thebumpersticker.com.
You know, I kind of feel bad about this because I'm throwing sort of an innocent, non-political guy under the bus, but I won't say his name. It's just a neighbor of mine I was having a conversation with. And he started off, and I've talked about this on the show before, maybe even in one of your interviews, but it's really instructive to me and worth bringing up. So he starts off with cocaine. You know, first of all, pot, yeah, go ahead and legalize it. Who cares about that? But, which is, you know, hey, that's pretty good. You know, he really seemed to just kind of wave his hand at it. No big deal. But then he says, but cocaine, that kills people. So right there, really, he must be thinking of heroin, because cocaine very rarely kills anyone, you know? Just people take it so they can stay up drinking later, stuff like that. Anyway, but he starts from it kills people to,
Well, so therefore, first offense for even having some, and no differentiation between being a customer or being a salesman. Not that I differentiate either in terms of morality, but no differentiation from him. You should get 15 years in prison if you're caught with any of it ever. That's it. Mandatory minimum, 15 years, maybe 20. And if you're ever caught with it again, then cut your head off. That was what he said. Beheadings for people who would continue to persist in cocaine abuse after they've been warned once by having decades of their life taken away. And that'll teach them. Then it'll go away. And that's how we'll get there. Where all he really needed, and I tried to give it to him, but boy, he couldn't listen. He didn't want to hear it at all, was that simple economic incentive that you said, that if you did that, boy, you would make cocaine really expensive. And then you would have the most cutthroat criminals of all straight out of the movies would take over the business. And they would be the only ones willing and able to participate in that level of black market trade. But it sure wouldn't make it go away, right? It would just create that much reason for that much more of it. But anyway, that's the argument that people get in. It's like a cul-de-sac, the statist cul-de-sac. All we can do is just increase the power and the penalty until someday we win. I've heard people numerous times in my life say they should just send the U.S. Army door to door to every house in America and take all the drug users and kill them, and then the rest of us will be fine. Like, I've heard, adult people say that must be the way we're headed here. What else is there to do?
Well, and what they fail to recognize is that somebody's already tried that. I mean, you've seen the increase in draconian measures in the war on drugs here. People say, well, we just need to crack down. They have cracked down. I mean, over the decades, they've got mandatory minimum sentences that takes discretion out of the judge's hands to impose sentence. They're locking people up. That's what mass incarceration is all about. They've got asset forfeiture that it now enables the police to steal whatever amount of money they find in cars on the highway, and without even charging the person with a crime. They're just taking their money away from them. And then you've got all these bashing down people's doors in the middle of the night. You've got abusing African Americans, stopping, patting them down, searching them, humiliating them. So there really has been this massive crackdown. I mean, that's why the penitentiaries are filled. But if you want an example of what these people say, because you're right, they're saying, well, no, Jacob, we need to really crack down. Bring in the military. Well, that's what Mexico did. I mean, for the last 7 or 8 years, Mexico has had the military enforcing the war on drugs. And the result has been absolute disaster. Massive death toll. I mean, the murder toll in Mexico is so phenomenal. I forget what the number is, but like tens of thousands of people because of the drug war. And then the military is abusing civil liberties in mass. I mean, people are almost at the point where they're saying, get rid of the military, we'll deal with the drug lords. And then you've got the Philippines, which is a drug enforcer's dream come true, where the regime there has been killing people now for 2 years on sight. I mean, okay, they're not beheading them, but they're shooting them. Any person, that is suspected of some drug law violation, including drug addicts, they just shoot them. I forget what the numbers are, but it's phenomenal. And that's after 2 years. You would think, well, okay, drug war over, right? Well, you've got this massive power, totalitarian power to just kill people without due process of law, without a trial. And yet they're saying, we still haven't won it. We still need to keep waging this thing.
Yeah.
So it's horrible. There's only one solution to this, and that is just legalize drugs. And you're right about the job-producing program. The people who are resisting this are the drug lords and drug gangs, because they know they'd be put out of business immediately with drug legalization. And then the federal judges, the federal prosecutors, the DEA agents, the law enforcement people that focus on the drug war, it's a jobs-producing program. They know that they would no longer have their big drug war racket. And a lot of federal judges, they spend most of their time on drug cases or immigration cases. Total waste of time. But they need their dockets filled to justify why they're federal judges or federal prosecutors or federal clerks. It's just a big job producing program, a very expensive and very destructive one.
Yeah. Well, and then there's all the incentives for corruption and bribes and that kind of thing, where even the pretension of honor among cops is thrown out. Everybody's on somebody's take.
and this kind of thing, whole sections of massive cities under the control of crime lords and this kind of thing, where that wouldn't happen otherwise necessarily. Whatever you think of having police, at least there used to be more of a facade of professionalism, where now it's just, the Powell doctrine of overwhelming force. And by the way, you mentioned the racism and the militarization of the cops, and those are really two sides of the same coin. You talk about in the article about how, it's not just, you talk about in the article, you mention it in the context of racist cops who, are getting away with, brutality because they can, in that sense. But then you just have the structure of the whole thing where, when you read Radley Balco in the Washington Post talking about 50,000 SWAT raids a year. I mean, well, where are those happening? Those are happening mostly in the black parts of town. And it's not just, racism that the cops hate black people more. Which probably is a part of it anyway. But it's that they know that these are people who are typically poorer and have less political power and less ability to fight back or have any accountability whatsoever. I mean, think about that. 50,000 SWAT raids. There's only 52 weeks in the year, and then you got to figure some holidays and stuff. So 1,000 SWAT raids a week. I mean, think about that. People still cry at the national anthem about how free we are and stuff when that's going on, all day long, every day, in every town.
Yeah, that is truly incredible. I had no idea that statistic. And yeah, they're militarized.
It's amazing how few shootings there are when you think about it. Breaking into people's houses in the middle of the night like that. And there are lots. There are thousands. But you would think it would be even more than that.
Absolutely, because how do you know who's doing the breaking in? You don't know if it's the cops or some burglar or some gang that's coming in. And you're right about the corruption. I mean, the drug war corrupts all aspects of society, but especially the police, the law enforcement people, and it makes sense. I mean, let's say you're a guard at the border, and you're approached, and they say, "Okay, you got a choice. You can take this $100,000 bribe to look the other way, or you can get killed along with your kids and wife." I mean, what's a guy going to do? I mean, it's sort of rational for him to say, "Well, okay, I'll take the money." And that undoubtedly goes all the way around. I mean, it's just a logical thing. I mean, they're getting the drugs in the country somehow, and there's just very little doubt that corruption is part of this, but there's a rationality to it.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, I don't know if this speech is still online, but I bet it is. I went, I guess a decade ago, it was 2008, to your Restore the Republic conference there in Virginia. And one of the speeches that was given there that I'll never forget was Jonathan Turley talking about the Fourth Amendment. And people may be familiar with him. He's a, TV lawyer, talking head guy. Ron Paul once talked about putting him on the Supreme Court if he was the president, which goes to tell you a little something. Although he's not a libertarian, he's good where it counts. And anyway, so in this speech, he was talking all about the Fourth Amendment and the history of these Supreme Court cases where the Fourth Amendment used to mean this. And then we went through this court case and this one and this one and this one, and these decisions chipped away, and most of it in the name of the war on drugs and in the name of stopping cars on the side of the road. And once it turned out that cops could have a cell phone and they could call a judge at home, that they didn't go back and undo the previous decisions that had said that, well, you don't need a warrant because it's too inconvenient to have to drive to the judge's house and ask for one. So go ahead and search in the name of you're traveling on a public right of way and all this and that. They didn't go back and once technology made it easier, they didn't go back and repeal that decision and go back to having warrants again. No way. And it's just the ratchet effect, as Robert Higgs says, through the perpetual drug crisis, where the Fourth Amendment, what's left of it is just a shadow. It's, barely even a thing compared to what it was before they went at it in the name of drugs. And he just did such a great job of explaining, how they got away with this level. It's just a little bit at a time, but it amounts to, the death of the thing. Yeah,
Turley's absolutely great. He teaches over at George Washington University Law School. And yeah, he's one of the real advocates of civil liberties and especially the Fourth Amendment. I mean, people forget that these amendments were enacted to protect society, to protect our country from federal officials. I mean, that was the whole purpose of the Fourth Amendment, because they knew that the propensity of government officials to assault people's freedom, their privacy, their homes, and so they wanted this express prohibition that you can't come and search me, my home, my belongings, unless you go to a judge and you get a warrant showing probable cause, and then you can come in. But man, the drug war has just decimated the Fourth Amendment. It's been just absolutely horrendous, especially on car searches, where essentially the cops now have carte blanche to just search whatever they want. And I'm not suggesting that all cops are bigots, but I am suggesting that some cops are bigots. And for the bigoted cops, the drug war is a dream come true, because they can go out and exercise their bigotry with impunity. They can just stop any black. They can pat him down, humiliate him, make him answer stupid questions, hope that he starts resisting arrest so they can pounce on him and say, stop resisting, as they're beating him up. And it's all legal. It's all, oh, thank you for your service because you're over here enforcing the drug war. You keeping America a drug-free society. It's bull. It's this group of bigoted cops that are using this system to exercise their bigotry. So it's not surprising that a bigot would be attracted to a police department in order to be able to do this legally and honorably.
Right. Yeah, they'd be crazy to work in the private sector at this point, right? Same with any murderer or criminal. What are you doing not being a sheriff's deputy? That's where the qualified immunity is at. All right, now speaking of drug wars, you got a brand new one today, still dying for nothing in Afghanistan. Maybe a little something. Hey, did you know, I saw this thing about the outgoing General Nicholson. And how his wife was, this major expert and sort of his co-general in charge over there for a little while, to a degree, calling some shots. And how, in her expertise, she said, the obvious thing to do here would be to legalize opium and encourage Afghans to grow it, to sell it for medicine on the open market. And that is the only solution to the heroin problem and all the black market, corruption and everything that comes with it. And of course, I guess they gave her a nice little pat on the head. But it's nice to hear that at least someone on that level gets it. And, I cite a couple things in my book about how this is what they did in Turkey and in India. There was no way they're going to take on the heroin cartels and destroy them. There's no such thing as that. They just legalized it, put them in business, and said, you know what? There's 7 billion people in the world. Enough of them need opium products for medicinal reasons that there's plenty of demand to go around for the supply. So, but I guess we're going to not do that. We're going to do what instead?
Maybe that's why the guy's no longer commander in Afghanistan, because his wife came out and said that.
I wonder about that. I don't know. I mean, his time was pretty much up, but yeah.
Well, no, and I'm glad you brought up the article because it relates. I mean, that here you had the Taliban regime that they've been fighting all these 17 years and that they ousted from power. And the irony was the Taliban had strict drug laws. I mean, there was no opium coming out of Afghanistan under the Taliban. So then they put in this puppet regime, and now it's the Taliban, and it's become the opium-producing capital of the world. But, I mean, look, the reason I wrote the article was that there's another soldier killed by somebody on the inside, some friendly Afghan cop, well, not so friendly, obviously, or some military guy. But, I mean, what did he die for? I mean, they brought in now the 9th commander. It's clear that he has no more clue as to what to do than any of the other previous ones did. They're just buying time, Scott. They don't want to pull out because they know that the second-guessing game will start. People saying, what was that all about? And as long as they can keep a force there that maintains this puppet regime, they can keep forestalling the inevitable second-guessing that we all know that everybody's going to engage in once this thing's over.
Yeah.
These people are dying for nothing, and they're killing for nothing. It's absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, Nick Turse has a new one today where he says they've turned the old adage around. I think he quotes Kissinger. I didn't know this was a Kissinger quote that,
about Vietnam, that all the insurgents have to do is not lose, while, the occupying power has to win. If they don't outright win, they do lose. But all the guerrillas have to do is just hang on, that kind of thing. And he said, but now they've turned that completely around. Where now all the American occupying power has to do is not lose. As long as they stay forever, they've never officially been defeated. And the Taliban, according to my credible sources, could never take the Bagram Air Base from the Americans there. They have enough power to, fend off any assault on that base from now on. And so just stay and try to keep propping up that Kabul government and never have to admit defeat. And so they've turned that whole thing around where, they'll never win, but at least you can't say that they've finished losing yet.
I think that's exactly what's going on at this point. And the guys that are paying the price are the soldiers that are sent over there to be part of this residual force. And like this guy here that just got killed. They're the sacrificial lambs to avoid having to put up with the inevitable price. Or people said, what was that intervention all about? I finished up my article by talking about a young waiter in a restaurant near my house, and he told me the other day that he had signed up to go into the military. And I just said, would you mind if I give you just one piece of advice? And he says, no, not at all. And I said, well, if they send you to these faraway lands, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, or wherever, just do not take any unnecessary risks, because you will be dying for nothing, and life's too valuable to die for nothing. And I could tell that he had never heard this before. His eyes were bulging out of his head, and that's all I said. So maybe it'll stand him in good stead. But that's the thing about these soldiers over there now. Now, they're killing people wrongfully, no question about it. And they've killed a lot of people wrongfully. Don't forget, this is an illegal war under our form of government, because our form of government says no waging of war without a congressional declaration of war. And there is no congressional declaration of war against Afghanistan. But on the other side, dying for this stuff is just dying for empire, which in my books is dying for nothing.
Yeah. Well, I had Lawrence Wilkerson on the show the other day, Colin Powell's former chief of staff and Army colonel. And he said, the overriding reason that we're there is because of China, because they want to build a highway through there, and which the Americans, I think, imagine means coming military dominance over all of Eurasia, which I think is ridiculous, but that seems to be what they fear. And then, but also it means access to the Uyghurs if they want to arm up and use the Uyghurs to fight inside China and keep China down. So it's all this grand chessboard stuff where the middle part of North America has to occupy the middle part of Central Asia or South Central Asia from now on to prevent a highway, maybe, which, is kind of a pipe dream sort of a project at this point anyway. And by the way, you know what, Jacob? I mentioned my source that said don't worry about Bagram Air Base being overrun. Well, that's Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, the great whistleblower and very experienced in the Afghan war. And yet when I asked him about this grand strategy stuff, he said, no, we never talked about that. So to your point about, the young man, the waiter at the restaurant and the rest of these guys over there fighting, where they're fighting, they're looking at it at this narrow point of view that, well, we're fighting to keep the Taliban out of this valley, or we're fighting to prop up a provincial reconstruction team supporting the government effort here or there in this or that district or province. And they're not even told that, hey, at some level, there's some idiot think tank goon who's decided that how important it is that we keep Russia and China out of their own backyard by staying in it. That there's this whole other thing that, and if they ever had to sell it that way, if they ever had to pitch it that way, honestly, that's what's going on here is the great game that we must dominate the center part of Eurasia forever, the American people would never go for that. So instead they say, well, we have to keep terrorists from using Afghanistan as a staging ground or some ridiculous, feint.
Right. As if terrorists can't use a living room or a hotel room anywhere in the world to plan their terrorism. And don't forget, though, the troops are protecting our country and they're protecting our freedom. That nonsense. And I wonder how many troops really believe that at this point. It's so ridiculous. I mean, there's nobody in Afghanistan that's trying to take away our freedom, or that it wants to take control of the federal government and is trying to take control of the government. This is classic empire. I mean, this is the way empires talk. Scott, when you talk about rivals, there's a rival hegemon arising in the Far East. China's rising. We need to put them down. We need to put them in their place. This is classic empire talk, and that's what this is about. And when they're putting in these puppet regimes, it's all part of imperialism, and that's what these troops are killing and dying for. If only U.S. officials were just honest. At least British officials, I think, were honest with the British Empire's imperialist escapades. I don't think when British troops were dying in Afghanistan in the 1800s that the British people were ever told that, hey, they're dying to protect your freedom.
All right, you guys, here's how to support this show. First of all, subscribe to the RSS feeds, iTunes, Stitcher, and all of that. All the feeds are available at scotthorton.org. And also at libertarianinstitute.org. You can also follow me on youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. And sign up for Patreon. If you do, anybody who signs up for $1 per interview gets 2 free books from Listen and Think Audio. And also you'll get keys to the new Reddit page, reddit.com/Scott Horton Show. And then if you go to scotthorton.org/donate, $20 will get you the audiobook of Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. $50 will get you a signed copy of the paperback there. And a $100 donation will get you either a QR code, commodity disc, or a lifetime subscription to Listen and Think Libertarian audiobooks. That's all at scotthorton.org/donate. And also anybody donating $5 or more per month there, if you already are, or if you sign up now, you'll get keys to that new Reddit group as well. Already got about 50 people in there, and it's turning out pretty good. Again, that's reddit.com/Scott Horton Show. If you're already donating or you're a new donor, just email me, scott@scotthorton.org, and I'll get you the keys there. And hey, do me a favor, give me a good review on iTunes or Stitcher, or if you liked the book, on Amazon.com, and the audiobook is also on iTunes, and sure would appreciate that. And listen, if you want to submit articles to the Libertarian Institute, please do, and they don't have to be about foreign policy. My email address is scott@scotthorton.org. Right. Well, you know, it's funny, too, that if they ever had to be honest about who's selling all the heroin in Afghanistan, you know, while waging this vicious drug war against the American people here at home, the Americans sponsor a government that basically is nothing but a bunch of heroin dealers. It's their primary source of revenue. It's like half the Afghan economy. And, you know, they say, oh, the Taliban when it comes to heroin. But same for, quote, our side, too. Are completely up to their eyeballs in this. And that's, you know, as you said, it's the greatest source of supply for black market heroin for abuse purposes in the world. And,
right.
And we put up with both of these things at the same time.
Right. They can't do anything about it because those are their allies.
Right.
That are out there producing the drugs. If they start attacking them, then they're attacking both the people in government and the Taliban who's trying to take control and end the drug war.
Right. And all the same corrupt, economic incentives apply there, too. You know, you crack down on some poppies somewhere. You just drive up the price, drive up the cost of a bribe, drive up a certain police chief's power in comparison to his governor, or whatever kind of distortions come from that. Same as always.
Right, and you decapitate one drug supplier and 10 more pop up. I mean, you can see this on Netflix, where they have this forever series called Narcos. I mean, and you know, they knock out one cartel, and so then they have to go to the next series, which is about the cartel that took over when the first cartel was knocked out, and then the third cartel that takes over when the second one's knocked out. That's the way the laws of supply and demand work, and that's exactly what would happen in Afghanistan if the U.S. started going after the drug dealers there. Right. Knock out one, and they're replaced by 10 more.
You know what? I think probably a decade ago, you and I had a talk about an article in the New York Times about how they did this in Mexico, and how when they took out a few of the major dealers, how all the lieutenants went to war. And it was Oh, and it was also the one, I think it was the same article where they talked about, it's like DEA guys reminiscing, and they're talking about how it used to be a bunch of, Margaritaville type open shirt, fun time, small airplane guys in the Caribbean, flying cocaine in, having a good time, and then they cracked down on them, and so then it went into the hands of worse criminals. The cocaine supply market did. And then they cracked down on them, and how the criminals just got worse and worse and worse the more they cracked down. And what's funny is how the DEA guys who are giving these quotes to the New York Times, like you can almost hear their tone of voice where they're like, it's almost like what we're doing is counterproductive in a way, if you think about it, and stuff like that. It's kind of hard to sink all the way in, but they're the ones telling the story about how they made it worse and worse and worse the whole time,
Well, and then the mainstream media feeds into this, when there's a big, massive drug bust in a community somewhere, man, the media's there, headlines, drug bust, and praising the cops and taking pictures and stuff, and never stopping to think that this is just one bust in a long series of never-ending busts. And it never hits them, especially when they say a record drug bust.
Right.
Well, that's supposed to be progress, that records are being set.
Yeah, I thought you guys won this thing back in the 1990s with the record drug bust back then.
Exactly. And they don't get it. They just don't get it. They say, oh, man, look what success is. Man, they've just busted this latest group. And then 1 year later, the same thing. Oh, wow, look, another drug bust for this community. It is so nonsensical. It boggles the mind that people keep buying into this thing.
That's funny. Okay, you know what? As long as I'm keeping you over time here, say a wise word about prescription drugs and the regulation of who can take what medicines, because that's the same kind of thing, sort of.
Oh, it's the same thing. I mean, the government has no business interfering with the doctor-client-patient relationship.
Okay, but let me speak for everybody's mom when I say, oh, no, but then it would be crazy and wild and you don't know what you're getting, and I'm afraid.
Well, not exactly. When you walk into a pharmacy and you say, I want some penicillin, well, did you go see a doctor first? No, I just want the penicillin. Okay, here it is. And the pharmacy's going to give you good penicillin. Or cocaine or whatever the drug is. Why should you be required by law to go pay a doctor to write this prescription out? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just a money-making racket for the doctors.
Okay, but I mean, they're saying that, listen, any old snake oil salesman could sell you any old crazy thing, and so that's why you have to have the government check it all first, or else you'd get poisoned.
That's entirely up to an adult. If he wants to go buy something from a snake oil salesman, that's his right. It may be entirely stupid, but it is not the role of government to protect people from their own stupidity. Well, and you're right. In a free market, there would be anybody's free to sell whatever drugs they want. But the smart people are going to go to the pharmacies, the reputable businesses, the ones that want to go to the fly-by-night. Well, take your chances. It works that way on anything, on a restaurant. Well, I guess that's not a good example since restaurants are licensed. Grocery stores. I mean, you can go to a really good grocery store, or you can go pick one that looks pretty ratty and stuff. Well, okay, you take your chances. But this should be left up to adults. That's what being adults all about, is the freedom to make these decisions and then bear the consequences for your own choices.
All right. Well, but so in a utilitarian sense, you think we'd be better off necessarily if we had a completely open and free market in these medicines? Or you think, I mean, because after all, people are going to say, hey, look, my Grammy's sick and I don't know this and that molecule from Adam, and so what the hell am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to decide?
Well, that's what doctors are for. I mean, that's what pharmacies are for. So it doesn't mean, in a free market, doesn't mean that you don't go to a doctor if you're sick, and it doesn't mean that the doctor doesn't prescribe medicine. It just means that there's no law requiring these things. So you go to a doctor, or your mother's sick, she goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, hey, I think you need some penicillin. Here's a prescription. You take it to the pharmacy, or you just tell the guy, here's the instructions for your mother to take penicillin, and you just go to the pharmacy and buy it. And then you follow the doctor's instructions. There's no reason why the state has to be involved in this process. that everything can be done just with the doctor, the patient, and the pharmacy.
I'm with you. And with the internet there to tell us what to think about it all. I guess, don't get me wrong, I'm for abolishing everything immediately, even going back in time. But I guess I'm just trying to speak for those who are afraid, because when you're talking about, what kind of potions you're supposed to be taking for all the wide and varied kinds of illnesses and degrees of severity, people want some kind of surety. And I guess whatever. I get it. You're saying trust freedom to play itself out and it'll work. Find yourself a good doctor on the market and it'll be fine. But I'm just saying, I think people really need to hear that, because I think otherwise this is exactly the kind of thing, other than the roads, it's exactly the kind of good government people think they need, FDA supervision over the pharmaceutical market.
Yeah, an analogy is licensure laws. And Milton Friedman wrote this great essay in his book, Capitalism and Freedom, calling for the abolition of licensure laws. And he didn't pick shoeshine people or, hairdressers. He chose the most difficult case, the licensure of doctors. And he wrote an entire chapter in the book showing why licensure for doctors should be abolished. Now, does that mean that quacks will be performing brain surgery? Of course not. It simply means the state is not involved in certifying which doctors are good and which ones are not. That means that if you need a brain surgeon, you need to check it out. You go to your regular family physician, you ask him for recommendations, and that's what people do today when they're finding doctors. Very rarely do people just look in the phone book for a doctor and say, well, he's got a license, I'll go to him. Usually they talk to their friends, for a specialist, they'll ask their family physician, and in a private market, you'd have certifying agencies. Hey, here's the best pharmacies to buy your drugs at. Here's the list. Or here are the best physicians. Here's the list. There's absolutely no reason why you can't have certifying agencies like Underwriters Laboratory or Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval or Yelp or anybody that's providing these recommendations to people, but ultimately leaving the final decision in the hands of the individual. If he wants alternative medicine, then that's his choice. And then he bears the responsibility if things don't go well. That's what a truly, genuinely free society is all about. And that's what we libertarians are fighting for.
Hey, that's what I'm saying. All right, FFF.org. That's where you find Jacob Hornberger. He writes every day at FFF.org. Thanks very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. As always, I greatly enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on, Scott.
Really appreciate it.
Until next time.
All right, y'all. Again, Jacob Hornberger, founder and president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Oh, and this one is called Legalize Drugs. All drugs. All right, y'all. Thanks. Find me at libertarianinstitute.org, at scotthorton.org, antiwar.com, and reddit.com/Scott Horton Show. Oh, yeah, and read my book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, at foolserrand.us.